Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar From Soil to Shelf, Closing the Gap in Regenerative Farming. I'm Debbie Davis, and I work in the Project Intelligence team here at Vypr, and we'll be sharing this insightful session. Regenerative farming is a hot topic and gaining momentum. However, many consumers still don't fully understand what it is and why it matters, or in fact, how it impacts their food choices. To provide you with a consumer-led view, we've created a report with input from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and Wild Farmed, and today we have representatives from those organisations along with a wider panel of experts to discuss and explore how brands, scientists, retailers and farmers can work together to bridge this knowledge gap. So on our panel today, we have Beth Mander, Programme Manager of Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Claire Mackenzie, producer of 6 Inches of Soil, Sophie Kirk, Senior Commercial Manager of the Soil Association Certification, Professor Andy Neal from Research Scientist Soil Systems at Rutherford Research, and Holly Holder, Senior Marketing Manager at Wild Farmed. Welcome to you all. To kick off, I think, given this is such a hot topic and given the fact that 30% of consumers who haven't heard of regenerative farming say they're eager to learn more, and even 43% of consumers are familiar with it, don't actually know what it means. Shall we start with the first question, which is, what exactly is regenerative farming? Is it as simple as saying it's like going back in time for farmers? Claire, would you like to kick off for us?
Yeah, so from my perspective as a communicator in this space and having researched and been involved in it heavily in the last 5 years, not as a farmer, not as a soil scientist, I'm not coming in with that, but for me, regenerative farming obviously starts with the soil. And so every regenerative farmer, a practitioner, is caring for the soil, trying to improve it, trying to bring the life underneath our feet, those billions and tiny microbiology that Andy can talk very clearly on, bring those back, make it healthy, have that community working well together. And it's community below the ground. If that's healthy, then the community above the ground can flourish, the plants can grow, can produce healthier food for human beings and cleaner water and many other wonderful attributes that regenerative farming brings to everyone.
Thank you. Andy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think your question was, is it bringing back an old way of farming? And in some ways, I suppose it is, because some of those old ways, because they relied upon organic matter as manures and compost, so were actually really rather good for soil. And as agriculture got more and more dependent upon inorganic fertilizers, we forgot about that organic bit in soil. But that's not to say regen is just a rebranding of organic farming either, because it does allow the use of chemicals, it does allow the use of herbicides. But I guess that people who are practicing this would like to try and minimize them as much as possible, so that they leave as a smaller footprint on the soil as possible. So it does take some of those organic principles, it does take some of traditional approaches, but it uses modern technology and modern thinking to farm in a more benign way.
Thank you. And Beth, how can circular economy principles best be applied to scale regenerative farming in mainstream food systems?
Thanks, Debbie. I guess it's worth just stepping back and saying kind of fundamentally what we eat is important. We all eat on a daily basis. And so there's a huge opportunity for us to affect change. And the circular economy, the way we conceive it, is that it's a systems change solution. So whereas today, our system is linear, essentially, we take stuff out of the ground, we make stuff with it, and then we kind of throw it away. And it's polluting and wasteful and, a cause of overshooting planetary boundaries. A circular economy is based on 3 principles, and really we kind of take them from nature as an inspiration. So it's about eliminating waste and pollution, or reconceiving waste as actually a resource. So as Andy just mentioned, actually it's kind of the manures are actually a resource to help build soil fertility. It keeps materials and nutrients cycling at highest value, and it regenerates nature as a direct result of its activities. And so when we talk about the circular economy at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, a really key lever for putting it in place is actually focusing on the design of products within the economy and also the systems that they sit within. So in food, we talk about applying circular principles to food design. And we look at food product design and say, well, what if, we can regenerate nature as we farm? What if we can keep all nutrients at their highest value and encourage the use of more diverse ingredients through changing up how these food products are designed through their new product development processes?
Okay, thank you. And Sophie, how can we ensure that regenerative doesn't become the next greenwashing term, and what safeguards need to be in place?
Yeah, well, I think it's fantastic from a farming perspective that more farms are moving towards nature-friendly farming wherever they may be on that journey. That's, only something that we should welcome. But the use of the term regenerative in consumer-facing claims could be vulnerable to greenwash. If it's used skeptically by businesses that may use the term to repackage business as usual or potentially to repackage, maybe very small or kind of minor improvements. And I think another thing you asked at the beginning, what is regenerative? And it's pro and con at the same time. The fact that regenerative isn't legally defined, it isn't legally regulated as a term, which means on one hand people can come in on the journey wherever they are. But on the other hand, it's used to describe a really broad range of farming systems and practices. It could be used to describe a farm that might be focusing on a kind of single practice like minimizing soil disturbance or tillage, right the way through to those kind of truly transformative whole systems approaches to sustainable agriculture. It's a real catch-all phrase, which does mean it has the ability, unfortunately, to confuse or mislead consumers if it's not used correctly. And I think in your report, you've already mentioned that consumers don't really know what regenerative is, and they're really crying out for further education, trust and assurance around the term. So in terms of those safeguards, there is some legislation coming down the track which will hopefully deter businesses from greenwashing, which I can cover in a moment. But I think it's really incumbent on brands and retailers to not misuse the term and to be really clear about what they mean when they are talking about regenerative. What practices or what outcomes are being delivered through their supply chains, and also to be really clear about where they are on their journey. Some regenerative businesses, when they use the term regenerative, are talking about an ambition, maybe something that their supply chain are working towards in 2030, whilst other businesses are actually talking about what's being delivered right now, or what outcomes or practices are being delivered right now. So the types of legislation that's coming through says the EU Green Claims Directive, which will require green claims to have third-party certification in the future. There's also the Digital Markets Competition Code, the DMCC, which has just been introduced, which gives the CMA, the Competition Markets Authority, the powers to impose significant financial burdens on those businesses who are seen to misuse green claims. So hopefully that'll be a safeguard in the future. And I think also tools such as organic certification, tools such as the measurement and monitoring of environmental outcomes can also be really key to helping to mitigate against greenwash in this unregulated space at the moment.
Definitely, thank you. I mean, at the moment, sort of only 19% of consumers are actively looking for regenerative farming labels today, but organic still also remains a highly sort of recognised trust marker. And I think there's a change in language that consumers are needing to get their heads around and understand exactly what it means. And Wild Farm, Holly, you've successfully built a loyal audience in a very, very short period of time. What for you has been the most effective tactics in educating and engaging consumers?
Yeah, so we've been now operating as Wild Farm for nearly 5 years. So we've pretty much tried many different tactics in terms of engaging and educating consumers. But I think for us from the very, very beginning, we very much set out to be not like a traditional sustainability brand. We were thinking, how can we make a brand that people want to showcase in their bakeries, that they want to showcase in delis, and eventually showcase in their homes, with our most recent launch into Waitrose. For the first 3 years, we were operating as a B2B business, but we acted like a B2C business. So we were having film showings, we were having chef-led ticketed events, we had a really strong social media presence. None of these marketing channels are typically seen by B2B companies, and definitely in the sustainability space, we weren't seeing a lot of brands operating like us. So we really saw that as a gap in the market and kind of ran with it. And I think that as a hook meant that then people were interested in regenerative, and then that's when you tell them the power of what you can do through this type of farming. People became loyalists. And obviously we know regenerative agriculture has a huge amount of like jargon and complexity. So we found that, yeah, time and time again, it was a lot easier to kind of hook them in with brand and then give them more of that in-depth information, whether that was through newsletters or websites or, again, like really in-depth, lovely, longer films. And then alongside that, just having really bright green packaging. Sometimes the fundamentals, people forget that actually if you just stand out on shelf or if you stand out in a deli or a bakery, a restaurant, people are going to take notice. And we've always had a very kind of bold and irreverent style of talking. So we're really out to ensure that sustainability doesn't need to be a drag and it can be a message of hope and positivity. And that's what we found to be really effective.
Excellent, thank you. And Claire, what inspired you to tell the story of regenerative farming through 6 inches of soil, and what impact do you hope it makes on public perception?
Yeah, so from the right at the beginning, we started to, sorry, terrible puns coming up, but digging into the subject locally in Cambridgeshire, and just wanted to know what was beyond the field. The fields here it's very intensive, breadbasket of Britain. And the director and I, Colin Ramsey, wanted to look at what was going on, and met Martin Lyons, who's head of Nature Friendly Farming Network. Started talking about, I've always been into organics, but he started talking about regenerative farming with nature, obviously. And that's where the journey started. It was when we went on a farm with David White, who farms with Wild Farmed, is a great proponent and advocate for this movement, and quite astounding, in his 60s, going from heavy sort of, being let's call it conventional farming, relying heavily on chemicals. And he started to turn away. He started to look at what was beneath his feet and how he could nurture that life, and started, integrating cover crops, etc. And we went on a field there in November, and the field was full of life. He had cover crops, the Phacelia, had sunflowers, there were bees, bugs. He dug the soil, it smelled incredible. We did a comparison to that field and his neighbour's field, who had allowed him to. And their field was exactly the same soil, but were different management. And it was that aha moment when you saw that brick without the organic matter, without the life, and it completely knows worms. Let's just take it as an easy one to indicate, as one of the indications for healthy soil. And it was at that point, when we created a film from it, it was well received, and we started to read more and more. And I remember speaking to Holly's colleague, Fran, at the beginning of Wild Farmed, and it was all of these things coming together, and think, wow, there is so much there. And that's where it started. But we wanted to connect the viewer, the audience, with a sort of higher level of what's the farmer doing with it, how are farmers coping with this, what are they doing. We did it through 3 young farmers to the start of their journey, because it is a journey, as everyone knows, and no one will claim that anyone's got it's such a complex system. So we wanted to show how they're on their journey with either a father or a partner, or alone, whatever, and then also the ins and outs, the complexities, not only of the management, but the running the businesses, etc. So that's how it came about. And since then, it was released last January. So that was January 24. We did a whole year of very, very intense screenings. It is still happening now. The impact has been the coming together. So we ran crowdfunders to raise money to make the film, and other fundraising that produced an audience. They have initially watched it and started to share it. So as ever, the criticism with any of these modes of communication, documentaries, etc., gets stuck in the echo chamber. We now believe that it's beginning to be used beyond that. It's in classrooms, boardrooms. We've been into the city with it. It's a really good place to generate conversations, and that's what most people have said. The feedback has been really probably for the conscientious consumer, or those who don't know as much. We used to all be connected with farmers, we're now not. And this film has enabled them to see what's on farm without having to travel to one. And the conversations and the camaraderie and the community build around it has been really, really interesting. I'd say the film brings up more questions than answers because we left it like that. We left it open to invite people in. So I mean, I could go on and on all day, but I think it has made good impact. Andy even wrote to me the other day and said he'd been at a screening recently and still felt that sort of joy and connection and being able to share the stories.
And it's definitely sparking debate and discussion now and getting people to realise where food is coming from. And I think that's also an important debate as well. And a third of our consumers in the report that we've got associate regenerative farming with environmental benefits, opening doors to deeper discussions on soil and biodiversity, which is sort of what we're discussing here. Andy, what do you think of some of the most compelling scientific findings around regenerative farming's impact on soil health?
Well, quite fortuitously, I was one of many authors that contributed to a British Ecological Society report just recently on regen agriculture in the UK. And as part of that, we too asked that very similar question. And there are two principles. So regen ag is sort of founded on 5 sort of principles, and 2 of those. First one, particularly about reducing or perhaps even eliminating soil disturbance. There's a lot of evidence that if you stop doing that, then soil structure starts to, the good soil structure that we depend upon for a variety of different, not just soil fertility, but sort of water management and the way in which soil interacts with the atmosphere, either sort of reducing greenhouse gases or being a source of greenhouse gases. All of that structure improves as you start to minimize your disturbance. Now, it's not to say that you should not disturb at all, because farmers are faced with all sorts of trade-offs every day. At some point, they may be forced to disturb. But the evidence is, if you can go for long periods of time with as little disturbance as possible, there's a real benefit to that for soil structure and biodiversity, and just in the way that the whole system functions. And sort of related to that, the other sort of robust evidence we have is that if you have a continuous cover of soil in the field all year round, or at least for as long in around the year as you can manage, particularly cover crops or intercrops or things that are growing alongside crops in the field, that can, first of all, aid soil structure, it can aid biodiversity, and it brings a lot of attendant benefits with it. So that those 2 approaches are really about pumping energy and pumping organic matter into soil and then keeping it there. And if you're able to do that, the soil will or self-organize. And that's, as a scientist, that's what I find most fascinating, is that it's a complex system that self-organizes, as long as we provide it with some of the bare bones that it requires, and that's organic matter. So there's little disturbance. So they're the 2 that I think there's strong evidence for. The other 5 pillars have some evidence, but it's less certain because we've studied them for less amounts of time.
Thank you. And Holly, so how do you balance from a brand perspective the storytelling and the science when sort of marketing regenerative products? Because in our report, we've got 41% of consumers say they'll be more curious to try your brand if they saw it highlighted in restaurants or cafes.
Yeah, so I mean, for us, it has to be storytelling. We find storytelling, and I'm sure Claire can agree that storytelling is, a really effective tool when it comes to marketing products that are specifically underpinned by really complex agricultural language. At the beginning, when we first set out, we were talking about nematodes, and we were really going deep into soil conversations. And for people that got it, they got it. But if you're thinking about strengthening regenerative agriculture as a term that people are going to understand and learn more about, you need to get them in with really nice, light analogies and stories. And
one of the privileges that I have working in this role is that I've got Andy Cato, who is an incredible orator, and he's really good at making analogies that people understand. We've recently just launched oats, and he was comparing oats to different types of Glastonbury sets. Or he'll be using analogies of gut health and talking about how applying, inputs and how that affects your gut health. So, really getting it into the types of language that everyday consumers understand. On the other end, I've got George and his dad, Larry Lamb, as well, that are going to hand out sandwiches outside a Waitrose store. And then as soon as they do that, again, it's like the storytelling. Why have you got into this? What's interested you about that? Seeing these well-known figures actually fall in love with regenerative agriculture and be able to tell it from their heart and with passion, like real passion. So once we get similarly with David White, he's an amazing farmer who can talk really, really passionately about the change that he's made. And we feel that just makes it as accessible as possible to consumers. And then, we saw that in the Vypr study that once that quality is matched, so once we're matching the quality similar to our, kind of more conventional counterpart, then people will buy in, but it has to be storytelling for us.
Thank you. And Beth, in your view, what role should top FMCG brands and retailers play in accelerating regenerative practices across their supply chains? Because 80% of consumers would trust a regenerative brand more if endorsed by a major retailer.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting finding, Debbie. And actually, we've been doing a lot of work over the last couple of years to bring new products to market that encompass our circular design principles. So it's underpinned by the regenerative piece, but then also overlays some extra opportunities in terms of ingredient selection. So more diverse ingredients coming into products, lower impact ones, and upcycling ingredients as well to make the full use of what a regenerative system can actually offer. And the great news was that the results of this innovation challenge demonstrated that actually when you design food according to these principles, nature is better off. And we've got quantitative and qualitative information to back that up. So we're talking nature, we mean soil health, biodiversity, water quality, and actually importantly, links to farmers and revenue for farmers as well. Now the brands also demonstrated a kind of a deeper understanding of the impact of their decisions once they'd gone through this program. And I think that really offers a pathway to kind of the greater collaboration and the rationale for building these links across the system. It gave the brands more agency to step into being part of the solution. So going back to that, you're seeing the circular economy as a system of solutions. The Big Food Redesign Challenge, that's the innovation, that's what we call this innovation challenge. There's lots of information on our website, should anybody be interested. But it showed in very concrete terms, this possibility. We had big retailers and big players engage in it, and they're hugely important for this shift. So our analysis demonstrated a few years ago that actually just the top 10 fast-moving consumer goods companies and retailers in the UK and EU alone had direct influence over 40% of agricultural land, which is huge. So essentially what we're saying is that the buyers in these big companies determine what is grown in our farmed landscapes and to an extent how that food is grown. So it's a massive lever for change. And I think one of the most powerful insights in your report is about how consumers expect these big players to lead the way on sustainability. No, it's fair to say that they have a deep interest, or a lot of them have a deep interest and certain targets around the adoption of regenerative practices. But the overall message from our work is really that we can't fix the system alone by keeping the same ingredients and the same products with the same ingredients, the same product portfolios coming to market. Instead, we really need to incorporate this greater shift to diverse and lower impact ingredients. So the big players, can generate this demand, for example, for more legumes, and that can really support a farmer, incorporate more diversity and greater rotations and give them that confidence in the system. So that's what I'd really like to see the big players doing, demonstrating that demand for more diverse ingredients. And we'd also like to see recognition that, investing in regenerative system just makes good business sense. From feedback from the businesses and the retailers that took part, we're seeing the benefits of using the circular design strategies to include future proofing and de-risking of supply chains, and kind of setting the companies up for more success in an increasingly volatile climate. So I think my final point actually on retailers is that they have a huge opportunity, both in terms of their own brand lines, but also in their ability to communicate directly with customers. So Holly mentioned, George, going outside a Waitrose store, but actually that direct point at which they engage with a consumer is a huge opportunity to lead change, and we'd really like to see them take it.
Excellent, thank you. And that sort of sparks a couple of questions, one for Claire and one for Andy. So if I kick off with Claire, so how do you, and taking it back one step or two steps further back, how do farmers feel about being part of this narrative, and are they ready to engage more with public services?
Farmers within, let's call it the regenerative, nature-friendly farming network, absolutely are very keen to, because they work well as a community. And I think that's one thing that attracted us to it. It's that communication, collaboration, because as we were talking about earlier, some of it's going back and readopting some principles that so maybe their forefathers have used, but then applying technology on top. So there's so many layers to it. And if you don't, a farmer said a wonderful thing to me recently. There are a lot of farmers quite scared to make a leap. This is a farmer up in Scotland called Matt Griffin. His work is phenomenal. And he said he's in a very, very traditional upland farming area. And they're all looking at him and thinking, well, what's he up to? He's a lunatic. He's mob grazing. Half the time the sheep are there, half the time they're not. And he said, but then they're beginning to come out of the woodwork. And they're beginning to come to him because he is communicating out there. And they don't want to communicate because they're nervous. They're nervous because they haven't gone down that route, but they want to know how to go down that route. But they don't have that agronomist coming. If they step away from it, they say goodbye to the agronomist and the chemical bag and the prescription of how to deal with their land, and they take a step into the big wide world, and that's really hard. So I think the regenerative world where the farmers are communicating well is a great thing, because they want others to learn and they want to do it together. And we also know that farmers aren't paid enough. There's huge issues there. So how do they afford to do it? Well, one way of learning and changing is having farm cluster groups, is working together, is getting behind and sharing resources, sharing machinery, if they go from a plough to a direct drill, etc. So I think that telling stories is really, really key, but there are some issues. And I saw it recently. One of the farmers in our film, Anna Jackson, put out a piece on TikTok, and she got huge, let's call them young farmers, I'm not going to go too specific, who basically came back at her and said, you're telling us that nature-friendly farming has lots of birds. I still, have used all chemicals on my farm, and I have lots of birds too. What are you saying? And so the communication is still tentative. It's still got to be very carefully managed. And I think, that coming together, and if it's done well through NFU and others, then I think that can be really important. But I really believe that more and more farmers are on socials, podcasts, films, TV, Clarkson, everyone's playing that role. So I feel it's getting more and more popular.
And I would jump in there, Claire, and say you've spoken about how powerful you found the film. And from my experience, so I've sat on a couple of discussion panels after the film, and I think it also gives farmers in their local communities a powerful platform to talk about the passion for what they do, why they do it, and how they would love to be able to reach their customers in the room more effectively. So it has those it ripples down, and individuals. We've shown these films in small communities in Devon, but it gives those farmers, who perhaps some people aren't even aware are producing extremely high quality food, just because they don't know how to access it. So it's enabling lots of different discussions, yes, within farmers, but also with a local community who wants to see those products as well. Sorry, I butted in.
Yeah.
I just thought that had to be said.
No, this is discussion and debate. So again, from the data in the report, fresh produce, sort of 54% are saying that fresh produce is a product category consumers most associate with regenerative farming. Obviously, it's wider than that, but that's about people's knowledge now needing to be expanded. But it also suggests that farmers' stories can more strongly reinforce product trust as well. So, Andy, following on from that, what misconceptions about systems or regenerative methods do you often encounter even amongst professionals? Because, again, from the research that we've got, many consumers lack basic education about the differences between regenerative, organic, and conventional farming.
Yeah, and that's really difficult. And I was happened to be talking to a group of people from Nestle last week, and about soil and regenerative systems, and it even they are struggling with trying to understand, what regenerative is, and particularly in their case, this concept that soil disturbance is so such a negative thing for soil, and they were looking to measure increasing organic carbon stocks with some of their farmers that were growing potatoes and other root vegetables, and it was just it's clear to me that they would never achieve large increases in soil organic carbon just because of the amount of disturbance continually going on. But they were they were getting very frustrated that they weren't measuring the soil organic carbon increases that they thought they should be seeing. So even it's a complex system, and conveying all the nuances to it to companies that are having to deal with a lot of different farming systems, and assuming that they will all have a capacity to increase organic carbon. I think it's that the penny dropped there during that discussion that we're not doing an effective job. Scientists are not doing an effective job in explaining some of these very complex systems, but it also made me think perhaps we cannot expect all of our food to be produced in a regenerative way. For instance, if you like potatoes, if you like root vegetables, which require a lot of disturbance, we may have to, as a society, accept that if we want to continue eating those, there will be a lot of damage done to the soil as a consequence. So that's one thing I think that isn't really conveyed particularly well. We also seem to think that, there's a perception, I suppose, we can sequester organic matter in soil ad infinitum, and that it's going to be a really useful way of tackling climate problems. And it's a short-term stopgap. I think we still need to think about much longer-term issues. Soil eventually saturates with organic matter, so it stops becoming a place for further sequestration. I think that also needs to be spoken about more widely. And I suppose the third thing is, and this isn't necessarily pertaining just to regenerative agriculture, farming is all about trade-offs. And, particularly with respect to that sort of regenerative approach versus organic approach, sometimes using chemicals is the better of two evils. And so, for instance, I'm very passionate about the moment of exploring our societies and farmers and scientists' sort of understandings of the relative benefits of using glyphosate to allow you to disturb the soil less as opposed to conventional ploughing. And they both have their problems, but we don't discuss the fact that everything is a trade-off sufficiently well with food producers and consumers. And I think making people understand that sometimes farmers will use a herbicide for very good reasons, because it allows them to minimize the disturbance of soil, which we know is sort of extremely destructive and causes all sorts of environmental issues to do with sort of runoff and greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere. So I think we need to be much more clever and nuanced about how we discuss those trade-offs. I haven't got a solution at the moment, but that's one of the things that I think we're failing to do. Science perhaps is failing to make it clear that none of these decisions are made in isolation. They have to be made as part of a larger.
And maybe if I can just offer a build on that, Debbie, because I think it's super clear that this wider systems thinking is what is needed, but it's difficult to communicate. And nature just doesn't work in kind of monocrops focusing on efficiency, which is how we've driven the food system. It works in complex systems. They're effective over long periods, and it relies upon diversity. And as Andy said, there are trade-offs on a daily basis for farmers to understand, how they can kind of work within their system. And I guess for me, then there's there's a certain risk associated with us just talking about carbon, for example, because actually, we know that carbon sequestration can happen in some systems, but actually we also need to be thinking about, can we support cleaner rivers and better water retention and less air pollutants and increasing biodiversity and putting in habitat corridors, etc., as we go about producing our food. So it's that we can't solely focus on a single thing. We have to be able to embrace this wider systems thinking and the complexity of the nodes within that system. And that is, of course, where it becomes super challenging to put a clear message across to consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sophie, what advice would you give to both food producers or retailers who want to make meaningful adaptation and communicate regenerative principles? Because the data we have shows actually 85% of consumers would switch to a regenerative product if incentivized with loyalty schemes, for example.
Yeah, well, from that kind of, I guess, that protection against greenwashing viewpoint again, I think if you're a retailer or a brand or a kind of a food and drink business looking to stock regenerative products, then we'd say to really examine your supply chains, production methods, their verification methods, and make sure that any claims that are being made are, that they can be substantiated. And I think from a more of a messaging or communication point of view, we found that some of the best ways to educate consumers are to keep messages really simple and consistent, and to also focus on the most marked point of difference for your product. So that could be, like, for organic, and depending on the product, that could be animal welfare. It could be the biodiversity benefits, up to 30% more biodiversity on organic farms, for example, or it could be the lack of artificial pesticides and chemical weed killers. We know that the number one reason why people buy organic is because it significantly reduces their exposure to harmful pesticides. It's better for the health of them, their family, and the environment. But we'd also really suggest not to scaremonger. Don't necessarily kind of compare your product with more negative, kind of detrimental farming systems, but really focus on the positive benefits that your product delivers. And also, when it comes to claims, there's the Advertising Standards Agency. They have a really helpful bespoke copy advice service with a 24-hour turnaround, which is really helpful for checking those claims. And then certified products like organic, they do provide really strong consumer and supply chain guarantees. They can be a shortcut for those who are looking for regenerative products. There's a globally recognized market for organic. Organic's independently audited, verified, it's enshrined in legal standards. It provides that guarantee of trust, basically, and helps to protect against greenwashing. And the market in the UK, it's worth over 3.7 billion. We saw 7% growth last year. So for a food brand or a retailer, it might be that, kind of thinking about organic as part of their regenerative strategy could be a clear opportunity there as well.
That's great, thank you. And obviously, Holly at Wild Farmed, you guys have adopted this way forward. What advice would you have for challenger brands trying to compete with more established names while staying true to regenerative values?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to mimic kind of what Sophie's saying. A lot of it comes down to substantiation. So obviously our mission at Wild Farmed is very much to accelerate the transition to regenerative agriculture. We do a huge amount of work behind the scenes that we don't publicize as much as we could or should do, although that is going to be changing as we accumulate more and more data and we have confidence in what it is that we can be talking about. But we have amazing partners. We've worked with Andy at Rothamsted, Trinity Ag, Bristol University, Regenify, the National Trust, WWF, like the list goes on. We have got a sustainability team now in-house, which we didn't have when we first started, who are working on this day in, day out. Because we know that without the legislation that exists of regenerative agriculture, obviously consumer trust is going to be lower. And what we can do on our side is deliver this work with confidence and build that confidence in our consumers. And I would advise anyone who's, thinking to go into this space to do the same and be prepared for the amount of work that you do need to do behind the scenes to be credible in this space.
Thank you. And Claire, what role do you think that personal stories and emotional connection play in helping consumers understand the value of regenerative farming?
I think they're becoming more and more important. Obviously, we've seen a huge rise of social media in the last 10 years, and you obviously depends on the audience you're communicating with, but you can tailor make those stories. And I think that connection, the traceability, we were talking about this yesterday with a brand, is really important now, getting more important for consumers. I know price is still the most important thing in the world, but if in addition to that, those stories can be shared, then people can understand a bit more, and the true environmental cost of any food really needs to be shared, because at the moment we're not paying for that. You know, if a carrot sprayed 14 times, etc., it hasn't been analysed about that, the true picture of it, etc. So I think that people really connect when there's emotional connection has been proven in studies. When Kiss the Ground came out, regenerative, the first regenerative film in with Gabe Brown in the States, they now have studies showing that when it went to policymakers and government or big companies, it was the emotional connection. It wasn't so much data and stats, because we all get a bit up to our eyeballs in it. I was sort of the analogy of reading as I've always been saying, environmentally campaigning is where my head goes. But after a while, if you read too much of The Guardian and too much of the negative stats, you get depressed. So that sense of emotional connection and hope, I think those stories really help people. And if people, there's wonderful people out there, such as the Red Shepherdess, who she brings, very bravely, they bring their family forward, etc. But she talks about the farming processes, etc. And it really helps people to connect and say, if they're selling a product, you go, wow, I know that person, I might want to buy it. So, look at Diddley Squat. Clarkson shares everything. People are queuing to get to that place. Not saying that everything there is made, but it's just a really good example. Bit faddy, he's very popular. But the same with Wild Farms. You've got Andy there, you've got George. It really does help. And those storytellings, I think they become more and more important. I've seen it with our smaller farmers that we've covered and worked with. It's also really nice for the farmer. I love this in the film, when we took Ben to the butcher, and he said, not more farmers need to see this. They need to see how their food is being processed. Most of the time it just goes off in a truck, goes off part of commodity market, etc. If it's cereals, and you have no connection with it. But actually, once you start, again, it helps them tell their full story, connect with that customer, and be really honest with how it's produced. And probably, he said, and others have said it, that as a farmer, you want to maybe farm differently, dig into different ways, because suddenly you're answerable to the customer. So yeah, there's socials, TV, films, podcasts, all of it, and there's so many coming forward now. I think it's pretty amazing.
Effectively, there's education and understanding needed from farmer right through, literally from soil to shelf, because both ways need to understand the start point and the end point and work together to deliver to the consumers what they don't know necessarily at the moment that they're going to want or need either in the future. So I think it's quite interesting how all the different perspectives are sort of effectively saying the same thing.
I think there's something interesting there as well about in the storytelling enabling people to understand the power they can have with their own pound at the till. And I personally think when people know they can make a difference, they tend to step forward. But there's this disconnect, it seems to me. So we're looking for kind of cheap carrots on the one hand, and then we're like, oh, well, I put money to wildlife charities because that stuff's important to me. And actually, it's about let's think about the power of that pound in your pocket and how you can kind of feed yourself and your family well, whilst also investing in cleaner waterways, better soil health, etc. But that messaging somehow, I think, doesn't come through so much. So I guess that's my challenge out to the storytellers. Like, how do we actually make people go, oh, I've got a pound and it's a win for me and a win for nature when I spend it in this way versus another way, which, as Claire just talked about, when you apply true cost accounting, we're paying 3-4 times as much.
Yeah. Holly, do you want to address that?
The true cost accounting of food is something that we talk about a lot. I think, again, when we first started, we felt that if we were to demonstrate to people why these products were slightly more expensive, and that was because you were paying for cleaner waterways, you were paying for biodiversity increase in fields, you were paying for all of these like nature attributes that you wouldn't be with kind of your alternative. However, as we've progressed and we've grown as a company, we're so acutely aware that taste, price, and quality are going to be those fundamental barriers that people need to overcome first. And that's kind of where our focus now is. And overcoming those requires a combination of meeting consumers' needs where they are. We can't come in with a challenger product that is entirely different and also has a whole new message. We have to give them a product that they love and that they recognize. And for us, bread's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. Like, Hovis first started in the 1800s. We are really challenging people on a nostalgic level, on a really deep fundamental level. Sustainability and regenerative agriculture is so young and it's so in its infancy. So our challenge has to be meeting people at what they know bread is, and then we can go in with regenerative agriculture. But strong storytelling, everything that Claire's mentioned, we know that they are working really, really effectively. And I think we're going to see some really positive results from that as we progress.
Yeah, so there was a report issued by the Organic Research Centre last year, which basically looked at shoppers' behaviour when it comes to purchasing organic, and they had some really interesting kind of insights around income and price and decision making. And although price was cited as the kind of main barrier to purchasing more organic food, the overall research showed that income wasn't necessarily in reality didn't necessarily always relate into kind of fewer purchase. And it was some of those lower income groups, students and younger families specifically, who are some of the most frequent or active shoppers in organic. It was around specific categories, maybe like fruit and veg, some beef and milk, so those dairy products, maybe those products which there might be, it's not always as marked a difference as maybe some other kind of different products like fish or chicken and so on. But they were more likely to be buying really regularly, around 4 times, regularly buying across 4 different category areas. So that was quite interesting. And also we know with organic that there's some products that do really well. So for example, carrots and bananas, around 11% of all carrots and bananas sold through major retailers in the UK are organic. Might not sound a lot, but actually that is quite a good proportion. And likewise, baby food, around 65% of all baby food sold through the major retailers is organic. So I think price is part of it, but what we found is that the key reasons people buy is around quality, health. They may have specialist diets, or be looking to eat healthier, maybe reducing as much meat and dairy, having less but better quality meat, have a real passion for cooking. So those kind of things were actually came out as being really, really important, and almost just as important as price.
Thank you. And we've covered quite a lot of ground, excuse the pun, today. Is there one message that you would like to leave with our audience to think about as we start to wrap up this webinar?
I have one, Debbie, for any food designers or kind of brands listening. And I think it's that, yes, we need to improve how ingredients are sourced, and organic and regenerative, absolutely fundamental into that transition. But let's also rethink the ingredients that are used to bring nature back into fields. We need to demand more than just potatoes, wheat, corn, rice, which is 60% of our calories. It's increasingly recognised that our bodies need more diversity. Field and farm rotations also need more diversity. So let's pull demand through the system so that farmers have confidence to put more beneficial crops into their rotations, because that's actually how we'll get a regenerative system churning.
I would just like to sort of follow up with that, is that we campaign that regenerative farming is the normal, that we work hard enough to support everything, and that the companies out there really start to understand it and see it as this resilient, diverse system that should give us farming for the future. Let's look to the next generations. We're not going to live on this planet if we keep taking from it. And I just think also want to say to any brands out there, you may say you're regeneratively producing a product, but your whole supply chain needs to be regenerative, and not taking that wheat and making it into ultra processed food, because that is the scary thing. That's what we're dealing with at the moment. And the biggest campaign now, the studies coming out with UPFs, is really damaging people. So you can have a wonderful wheat, have a wonderful chickpea, and then put it into some terrible cereal and then sell it to a family, but with a great label on it saying it's regenerative. That's the sort of thing I'd love to not see happen.
Sophie, can you say the lasting word?
Yeah, I think I'll finish off on just, I guess, framing where organic fits into the regenerative conversation. I don't know if I've had, real opportunity to do that yet, but I think where we see organic is that it can really, we see it as having a real key role in helping consumers to trust regenerative claims. We do see organic as one of the gold or leading examples of regenerative agriculture, and it's actually the only legally regulated, annually inspected, independently verified regenerative certification that is globally recognised and also spans multiple categories and products. So it does provide those strong consumer and supply chain guarantees. Organic farming takes a whole systems approach to sustainable agriculture. Organic farming is enshrined in law, and organic farmers have to meet a strict set of ethical and environmental legal standards that have been carefully developed over 70 years to build soil health, biodiversity, and ecological balance. In many ways, we do see organic as like the Regen OG or like the Regen Original. It was organic pioneers that first coined the term, Sir Albert Howard in 1943 and then Robert Rodell in the 1980s. So yeah, we do see it as that kind of original form. Yes, the term has broadened, expanded in both directions, but that's really where we see it. And partly that's because organic has proven to deliver regenerative outcomes. So we know that organic farms are havens for wildlife. There's up to 30% more wildlife on organic farms. Organic farms also help to create fertile living soils with up to 25% more carbon storage on average and more soil microorganisms. And we also know that organic farmers practice some of the UK's highest standards of animal welfare. Not always, sometimes, but not always, an area that's covered in other regenerative systems. Also organic farms are independently inspected every year, and they do provide that guarantee against greenwashing. I think the final point to make is that we definitely recognise that organic regenerates. It is that kind of leading example of regenerative. Not all regenerative farms are organic, and as Andy said already, that may be because they're not necessarily meeting all of the standards that are kind of required in organic. For example, they may still be using chemical inputs and fertilizers, whereas organic farms must manage their systems without those use of those artificial pesticides, chemical weed killers, or nitrogen fertilizers derived from fossil fuels, and use natural methods to build soil health instead. So because organic certification provides these robust safeguards, we do see it as a trusted signpost for those customers who are seeking assurance in regenerative products. And this is particularly important at a time when they're really looking for further transparency around those green credentials and claims.
Thanks, Sophie. I think that's making it really clear as to how the marketplace is sort of forming and how it has formed and what it needs to build on. Thank you. Andy, do you want to leave us with one sort of final thought? Or
Well, I suppose something we haven't touched on that is just worth mentioning is that that livestock has an important role to play within the whole cycle of regenerative agriculture. We haven't really touched on it here. And there's lots of evidence that having a period of herbal or a period where you're not growing cash crops, you might be growing a pasture, for instance, which really pumps organic matter extremely effectively into soil, and even more so if it's grazed, and even more so again if it's grazed in a sort of a mob grazing sort of approach. That livestock's become a very useful tool on the farm, and at the moment that's an area of an intense debate and argument between farmers and consumers about should we be having livestock on our farms. And I think regenerative agriculture gives a real role, an important role in managing nutrients and managing fertility within farming systems. Didn't touch on it, but I think it's worth just saying that again, we need to be much more clear about our communications here about the role that livestock has in these.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to one of the earlier points where consumers are thinking about fresh produce, but not necessarily the wider farming community and impact that that has. Thank you. And Holly, one sort of final thought from Wild Farmed.
Yeah, of course. So, I guess whilst Regenerative might still feel like it's in its infancy, we launched in Waitrose last year and we sold 1.6 million units to date. So we know that this is growing in popularity. It's not just a trend. I'm sure the Vypr report completely corroborates this as well. So I'd say to any kind of procurement buyers, chefs, bakers, or brands looking to source from Regen, go for it. This is a really positive movement that has incredible positive attributes for nature, improves soil health, increases biodiversity, reduces carbon and minimizes water pollution. As Beth mentioned, this is an amazing way to vote for nature with your wallet, and the more of us in this space, the better. It's not about trying to compete. Regenerative is not a competitive space at all, because we are all learning together on this journey. So as we keep telling these stories, we're going to keep strengthening consumer understanding, and ultimately we're going to have that positive impact on nature and the planet that we all want to see.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, I'm sure everyone watching will agree that it's been a very interesting conversation, and I'm sure it's not the last time that we're going to hear some of these themes come through. And I'd like to very much thank Andy, Beth, Sophie, Holly, and Claire for your time today. And everybody watching will receive an email with links to all the resources mentioned and access to our Regen report as well. If you have any specific questions for our panel that haven't been answered today, please reach out via email, and that's hello@vyprco.com with Regen in the subject line, and with the question that you have and who you're aiming that question at to. So thank you very much for your attention today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.